This is going to be our quick and dirty Apex Prime assembly video. Quick and dirty because this is one of the first ones we've ever built, so hopefully it'll be easy to follow along. And I'm going to try to do things properly based on my memory. Second one I've ever built. That being said, if we need to refilm this, we can. But with this one, I'm also going to document each step of the process for a step-by-step build guide. So hopefully it'll be, at the very least, all the steps included, and we can rearrange the order of the steps as necessary. So this is the Apex Prime kit, default barrel, default spring. I unboxed everything, and then I'm gonna work on it. Here we go. So we've got our rails, don't need those yet, but they do come with a hex key and screw mounts for those. You should only need a few tools, depending on how you like to build your blaster. They recommend using, red Loctite or permanent Loctite. I'll just use this blue Loctite, so that way I can take it apart later if I need to. And then of course I have the hex key set here. You don't need all these sizes, but a bunch of the small ones are useful. You definitely need a 2mm, a 2.5mm, and the B car, that if you do get the Sabre B car, that also uses a 2mm and a 2.5mm. And then you have some larger ones for these larger screws, and if you use the bolt prime, then you got an even larger one there. So a full set is nice. And then of course I've got a power drill here instead of a hand one, just to make it go faster, because I'm confident that I'm not going to over torque anything. Got a low torque setting here, so I'm just going to jump into it. Let's see if again, this order might be different, so we're going to almost just break it up into steps as I go through it. So first, I do know that I need to assemble the bolt here. I'm going to make my center frame in the center. So the Apex does not come with a main grip or a foregrip for either side, so I'm going to grab those as well. Okay, that's for the pump grip section. This is for the pump grip section. This is for the sear section. This is the optional bolt prime, which I'm probably not going to install right away, but we'll show you that later. Okay, so I'm just going to start with this, the pusher core and the breech here. They recommend red thread locking this, but really you just want it to air seal and to not loosen up. So I'm going to put tape on these threads in this orientation, so that way when I tighten the breech, the pusher into the base, it won't bunch up the tape, but it'll actually tighten the tape down. Now if I threaded it clockwise, then as I was tightening it, then it would back off the tape instead of tightening the tape back on. I'm going to tighten that as far as I can. And you can carefully use a pair of pliers to grab the stem and tighten it all the way. I might actually use something like a small hex key here and tighten it from the top. Not a great mechanical advantage, but that might get me where I want to go. All the way down so it's seated. And then while I'm here, I might as well put on my O-rings. So I got one for the ram or pusher tip, and we of course have a spare. Set that aside. And then these should all be the same size. They look like they are. So one on the base. There's our pusher. And then of course you're going to use one more on the plunger head as well. And then you have one extra. So I'm going to start with the shell to make sure that I can get everything lined up the way it's supposed to be. And some other things I'm going to make sure I do as I go is build the internals that I'm then going to set inside of the shell. So I'm going to grab, let's see, this is for the stock. This you can see is kind of like a breech gate thing, very descriptive. And the breech is made up of two halves here. Let's see, so this is the back, this is the barrel collet adapter. So this is the very front. And then this is for the plunger tube sits like this. So that is then bridged by some of these pieces that go across. Let's see, missing this guy, here we go. The other breech piece, this is the front, I believe. So you can see that those grooves line up. So then those get installed with this little bridge piece in between. I found that this is sometimes tight, so you can use a small mallet to help you out. I'm just gonna gently tap it with my hand, or you could use something, similar. Yep, so that is then seated in both pieces. And then so you can see that that's gonna sit. And then that'll sit there. You can see that there's this block that I don't remember. Oh, right, that's for the banker, banker, banker. Nice. So the biggest issue people have, I think, is with the different sizes of screws. So we have these, and then we have these, which look like 10s, and then 8s, and then we have this other size, which looks like 12s. Could be 10, 8. But anyway, you've got the shortest, middle, and longest, and then you have to make sure those go in the right spots. And if you get them in the wrong spots, they won't thread in all the way. And you can see that some of these holes are deeper than others. You see this one is way deeper than that one. These two are the same, and then same thing, this one's deeper than that one. And so you have to put the shorter ones where the shorter ones go. That's the biggest hang up. And then the sear catch grip area is pretty simple, but we'll do that next. So we have our grip mount for the handle. Then we have our spacer thing. These are the adapter for using different style grips. So if you have AR, like a standard mil-spec grip, you will not need to use these adapters because an airsoft style grip will have a wider opening, so then you need to use these shims so that way it fits. If you use a normal AR style grip, you don't need that shim. But I'll add those later at the very end because you don't need those now. And then we'll do our mag release catch block, rear spacer. So we're gonna take this block and install, again, anything metal on metal, I'm just gonna go ahead and use thread lock to keep it tight. Just a little bit of thread lock will keep my screws tight over the long haul. This is a 2mm drive. Oops. And then I'm gonna take this spring and I'm going to install the screw until the spring loop is around the screw. Tighten that down a little bit more. So then I got a screw, spring, retained. Then we're gonna take one of these really small M3 socket head bolts with our 2.5mm driver. I'm gonna put a drop of thread locker on it. Yeah, try to remember to keep this right over the middle here. And then we're gonna do that through the screw. So I'm gonna take my screw, loop it through the spring, and then put it through the cutout on the sear. There we go. Okay. Then again, lots of more. So these small button head screws, they look like 5, maybe 6mm screws. I'm gonna have a few extra, but that's okay. And I'm going to attach it to one of these side panels. So like this is gonna be a 2mm drive. So I, again, am going to do a little bit of thread lock so the screw doesn't vibrate out. Then I'm gonna do panel inside the gold in this orientation with the screw through that. Then I can do a little bit of torque, make sure it's tight, and repeat. I am gonna actually keep these loose so I can go through and tighten them finally because there is some play. So I want to keep that play until the very end when I do my final adjusting of the position of everything. That's the other complaint I've heard about sheet metal body blasters is because there can be some bending and some play in the parts. That's best to keep it loose first and then tighten it down all the way at the very end. So that way you don't have to worry about getting the tolerances off at the very end. So I'm gonna switch that over and do the same thing on the other side. Then we're gonna grab these are the smaller but wider pins, and we're gonna put one for the pivot on the sear. So through the hole in the black, through the sear. So then we're gonna put the other pin for the trigger here. You're gonna make sure your trigger is beneath the sear. and that is the grip and trigger module. Again, if you're using a wider grip, you'll install these spacer brackets, so that way you can fit around a larger grip. I can see that the screws were not included for these, but they are the same as your rail screws. So they're just kind of M4 by 10s or so, but we'll send these with you for your apexes, since Sabre did not include these in their kit. I guess I should do thread lock. And you really only need one on either side, but you could do two, especially if they're too long, because you can see that the full length screw, at least the ones for the rail, might be a little too long to fit halfway through. So I would put them in different holes. So one side will go into the top hole and the other one will go into the bottom hole. So that way they don't, if they are too long, they won't hit each other. But there's the grip assembly, grip and trigger module. Next, we'll move on to the mag release module, which is what we're working on first. And then for this, you're gonna need your mag release block, of course your mag release spring, some more of these small socket head screws, and then 3 of these pins. And this assembly is pretty easy. I'm gonna set this aside. Make sure this is in the center frame. Again, same thing with the lock, the thread lock. Drop the thread lock on your screw into your spring. So I did get that right the first time. It's just a weird size. And then I'm going to, with the mag release upside down, put a pin into the rightmost hole here, and that'll retain my spring. And then I'm gonna do the same thing with the other 2 pins. So I'm gonna put another pin on the bottom right corner, and that acts as my overextension stop. And then the mag release pin. So now if I extend it all the way, it stops and doesn't get hung up. If you lose this pin out of the inside here, you'll end up having your mag release be able to be pulled too far, and you could permanently stretch out that spring, and so it loses its springiness. So you don't want that to happen. And then again, they said go on the next module, which I think makes more sense to then have the build guide be one long guide instead of 15 different PDFs. But I'm gonna set that aside for now. Then we have the middle Magwell module, which is what we press together here. These just fit into each other, and if they're tight, you can do a little bit of a hammer. But it shouldn't be too bad. Then the linear guides. Now this section is, I'd say, the most important to be careful with, because you have ball bearings in these linear guides, and those ball bearings can fall out and get lost. So you want to make sure that you don't lose the ball bearings out of your bracket kind of things. So we're going to take all of our priming block parts, and I'm going to do the bottom prime. So this is the pump action and the pump action brackets for that bottom prime. If you're doing bolt action, you don't have to install these brackets. Instead, the bolt handle gets installed into the side, just straight into the side. So we'll start with this. So with the longer of the two, I'm just gonna open this and not lose our bearings. We are going to have to drive screws through. So first we're gonna take our really small socket head screws. All it is these guys go through here. So I'm gonna use, again, some 2.5 thread lock. So I'm gonna use my longer M3, I guess, socket head screws. Yep, the longest of the ones that are in the kit. These look like 8s. And I'm gonna put them on the top, yep, the longer. The longer guides, I'm gonna put these screws all the way to full tightness onto the top guide there. So I'm going to go to full tightness, so I'm just using this normal hex Allen key, a little bit of thread lock. Oops. Getting thread lock everywhere now. Tighten that down. Full tightness, finger tight. And then the priming block will ride on those screws. Like that. So we're good. Also, it does help to lubricate the guide rods. We'll get to that. And then on the other side, we're gonna do a very similar thing, but on the lower guide rail and slide. We're gonna go through the block. It's gonna be a little tricky. So we're gonna insert screws. Oops. There we go. We're gonna insert screws into the guide block and then into the shuttle, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to, again, do a little bit of thread lock. Then without spilling bearings everywhere, I'm going to tighten this down. Orientation does not matter right now, but you will have, of course, the whole line up to the rod. With the rest of these, I'm going to thread lock on the screw, and then I'm going to slide that screw into the hole in the bottom and then tighten that into the guide. Finger tight, nice and tight, finger tight, nice and tight. Don't want these loosening up over time and causing problems with them rubbing on things. The last thing I'm gonna do on this piece is make sure that there aren't burrs on the inside of this block. The barrel rides through here, and so there is gonna be some clearance for the barrel to not hit the block. But if you have, any bad burrs or some metal from the steel that didn't quite get cut all the way clean, you can file that. This one feels pretty good. And then the next thing I'm gonna do is put on these pump grip things now, and they're gonna go in this orientation here. The newer version has 2 screws. The original version had 1 screw. Of course, 2 is better, and so I'm going to use the rest of these 4 little button head screws, and I'm going to attach them. It's a little drop of thread lock. Put that screw in there. Honestly, these could be longer. I feel like longer might be better. So if these work out, or I should say if these work themselves out over time, you can swap these screws out for slightly longer ones. You don't want them so long that they then interfere with the barrel on the inside, but longer ones should give you more thread so they do not loosen up as much, which can be a common problem with the apex. The apex is pumped because of these screws being metal on metal and being so short. Can be known to loosen up and cause the foregrip to be loose or cause it to torque and then make the prime more difficult. Again, don't let that shuttle drop all the way out. You'll lose some bearings. So there's that. And then you of course have this adapter as well, so then screw on the rail for the bottom. I'm gonna do this at the end because I'm not sure what screws go into it. So we are then going to take the rail and slide it on top. Ooh, very low friction there. And then these get slid into the front. Now this is the block with the large threads for the barrel collet. Just like that. And then you then have the rest of this section slides on to the top of the rail there. And so that's going to be the length of the bottom rail. So when you have that all lined up, I believe you're going to use these smaller M4 screws. This one's loose here in the packaging. I'm going to install those to hold the rail on. So I'm going to make sure that the holes line up right there. And then I'm going to do one of these really small screws here. M4 by 6, it looks like. Maybe an 8. Do the same thing on this one here. All the way to the back, line it up. So now the bottom rod's in place. The top rod is still loose though. So then I will lock that one in. You can see the holes line up. We're gonna install the pusher rod and block. So we have this rod here. So the shorter side, you have a shorter and a longer side. The shorter side goes into your priming block. The longer side goes into the pusher. Yes. And now this is what can loosen up. And then if it loosens up, it causes problems because you can see that plate. So here I'm gonna use, they recommend red thread lock. I'm gonna use blue thread lock and tighten the heck out of it, tighten it very tightly. So this is gonna be the M4, these are gonna be these screws, these M4 longer socket heads. So I'm gonna put one into, this is gonna be a 3mm drive. I'm gonna put some thread lock in the hole. And then some thread lock on the screw. Then I'm gonna put this in here. And then while pressing it down, okay, nice and tight. And then the screw that then holds the orientation in place is the set screw on top. So I'm gonna use one of these smaller M4 set screws for the top of the pusher, or the ram base. This will keep this from rotating on you. So this one's very important. This is a 2mm hex drive. Generous amount of thread lock. Place it in the hole and tighten it. And I'm gonna be extra generous. Do a little bit of torque there. I don't want to strip it. Okay, and then this pusher block, we do also have this shock pad for the plunger. We'll skip that. Here though, I'm going to lubricate the pusher O-ring a little bit. Then I'm gonna do the same thing with this priming block. Is thread lock. And then a reasonably generous amount of torque on a 3mm hex drive. Yeah, it's not going anywhere. Okay. So there's that. Then I'm gonna work on this, the stock piece here. So that's gonna use these longer M4 set screws. And we have this collet ring here. And basically we're just gonna install the collet ring into the stock with the screws to hold it in. So we wanna line up, so we have the flanged end and the wider end, and then we're gonna slide it together, and you should be able to have the wider end. If you put like a hex key in it, you should be able to tell when the holes line up, and you can see that the holes there. So then I will take a 2mm drive, a little bit of thread lock, and install this into the top all the way down. Okay, and there for your spring and your stock swaps. Okay, next we're gonna work on the plunger, which is of course this massive guy. We're gonna lube it up. This hole is for the sear, that'll face the rear of the blaster, and that gets installed. Gonna lubricate the tube. Just a ring of silicone-based lube. And that gets installed into the rest of the body here. So the hole is the back, so the end without the hole goes on first, so you can put it around the ram. So that lube should make it so you can then set it in. If it's too tight, then you can mallet it a little bit. Depending on how the tolerances came out, you can tap it. If you need to though, support this side and tap it on the back. But yeah, not too bad. And then the plunger, of course, you have your O-ring, your plunger, and then their little shock pad here, which is just a piece of rubber. Make sure it's clean, and then a little shock pad. And then you could, of course, do some more lube on the back side or on your plunger. Slide that into the back all the way up. Yes, that's a bit dry in that tube there. It's a little bit harder to get in and out. Gonna need some more lube on there, so play with it. There you go. You're stuck. Okay, and then we have the end piece that then slides on like so. That rod goes into the top. There we go. And then we have the short M4 grub screws. So these shorter grub screws we'll then use to secure the plunger tube into the bottom. This is using their build guide, of course, so we want this slot to be perfectly lined up vertical. So I think using these screws now is not necessary, but we can put one on both sides. And then to secure the rail, we can then put some more set screws, line the holes up here, and then do more set screws, and we can do the long set screws for the back of the top linear rod. And then we'll do one more. I'm gonna put it in the front of the linear rod. Okay, so then we're going to install basically the shell with all these components. So we are going to line up the internals with the body. Well, so on one side, you can kind of see the hole should all line up. So we want to put the 6s, again, it's gonna be a lot of thread lock, but we're gonna put our 6s, the shortest ones, our 6s, again, are gonna go into the shallower hole. Now I'm gonna keep these nice and loose so I can go through and I'll make sure everything's in alignment and then go through and tighten them again later. That's gonna make a big difference. And then we have another shallow hole here. And then we have a symmetrical hole depth on the other side. So we have a shallow one here. So then your last shallow pocket. Anyway, we'll finish this up real quick with the 6s then. So yeah, that's why the screws sometimes vibrate out. All right, so 6. And some of these can be longer as well, but we're just gonna use 6s for basically everything. So these are our M4x6s. Wrong, I thought they were 8s. They're 6s. I mean, those are 10. They're 8s. Oh boy, that was a little too much. Keep going. So if you have some misalignment, you can loosen the screws or see which piece isn't fully set right, and then get it into the right position. This one here is a little bit too far that way. You don't want to cross thread anything, so don't force it if it won't go in. Try to bend the threads where they try to push the piece where it needs to go, so you don't cross thread the threads. It's better that that you keep the threads intact, and so don't force the screws, but get the holes lined up to where they need to be. Again, that was the wrong one. That one's a 4. The rest of these are 6s. I don't have any M4x4s in the whole shop, I don't think. Nope. Just about done. Wonder if lock washers would be a better idea. So if you have M4 screws that have lock washers, those would probably be better than using thread lock and everything, because lock washers have the same function, but you lose a little bit of length on the screw, which actually would be helpful since some of these are too long anyway. Okay, I've got all of the sheet metal screws in. Now I kept them loose so I could adjust things later. I am missing one M4x4. We'll go ahead and send you extras, since that's a pretty common issue in the Apex kits, is those shallower holes not quite accounted for. And then in order to install the rest of this stuff here, we're going to take our grip assembly and we're going to take our spacer block and we're going to put the spacer in the grip assembly like so, and then we're going to slide that into the body. Now the screws that hold this together can go all the way through, so they can be half that distance. So we're going to use these longer M4s that we saved for this purpose, because if you put one on either side, you see how they're slightly too long. So you can't use the longest ones, you gotta alternate long and short. You could use all short ones, but then you might not have enough short ones for the rest of the build. We'll wanna put this grip thing together like this. And then we'll wanna make sure we line up the holes through that spacer, make sure it's all lined up. That's obviously not lined up, pushed it too far in. And those are going to be M4x8s. These are kind of our middle size screws. We have 6s, 8s, and 10s. So we want to use our 8s here. And then this back piece, you can use 10s, because you have this kind of guard to prevent your hand from hitting the sear, and these can go all the way through. So if you use 10s on the back, you can see that they will go all the way through. So then this spacer piece goes on the back like this, kind of help fills out that gap cosmetically. Then you have this sear cover, helps keep the dirt out. Optional, but you can put it on, and then line up those holes, and then we'll do 2 10s. 10s here. Then we'll flip it over and do the same on the other side with the 10s in back, 8s in front. 10, 10. 8. You could also use a 10 and 8 and alternate on these front holes. You must use 6s on the mag release. or they are too long. I'm gonna get the holes lined up a little better. Using my hex key as a lever. Tighten those a little bit. Then on the front though, you can use whatever hex size you want because the holes go all the way through. So I'm just gonna use 10s for maximum thread length engagement. Again, so these are kind of tight. I might loosen these screws a little bit. Yeah, I kind of over tightened those ones already for my initial hand tight test. So again, I will make sure these are looser. Yeah, those are too tight. So that way I can get my spacers in, get the alignment all right. Loosen these 6s here. There we go. Line up that. And these I'm just gonna do 10s because I have them left over. And then I'll do the opposite on the other side. So I'm gonna do an 8 in the front and then a 10 in the back. So I get kind of equal clamping on both sides. Doesn't matter too much though. Okay, so again, just hand tighten all those. Oh, and I forgot these two need to be 6s as well on the mag release. Oop, you're way out of frame there. Get you back there in the center. Yeah, so get these holes lined up. Don't cross thread any screws. So that's all the important bits. Of course, we have the barrel and whatnot. So I'm gonna go through and tighten the rest of these down. Then I'm gonna also make sure that my grip screws here are nice and tight. A little more torque on those guys. I've had these come off, loosen up on me before. Okay, the last little parts are gonna be, of course, the rail up front. We're gonna use 10s for those for maximum thread engagement. Line that up. A little bit of thread lock. Just going all the way to torque on these ones. A little bit of thread lock. A little bit of thread lock. Although I might use bolt action on the next one. If you'd rather have a rail on the bottom and not a pump action, if you want to use a side prime instead, then you would just remove the bracket from either side with a 2mm hex key, and then you would put your rail just directly on the linear guide on the bottom. So not too hard there. But I'm gonna go the traditional route. Oop. Nice. Of a lower pump action grip. Let's do a little bit of thread lock on here because I don't want my grip to loosen up in the middle of a game. Extra spacer pieces if you want to use them, but you don't need to. So I got all that going, and then for the spring and stock, it's pretty self-explanatory where the spring goes into the back. Yeah, so spring in the back, then you've got your adapter piece with a locking ring. And what you can do is you can then have that spring ready to quick swap when you want it, but you can also tighten this to get, you know, plus or minus 10 or 20 FPS, depending on your darts and air seal. So that just screws into the back, and then you can lock that into place with this ring. And that'll help lock that position into place, that way it doesn't vibrate out. And then the stock, you've got this, another adapter you can use. And then your stock has a hole in the top for M5 screw. So this medium size, not the really fat ones, but this medium sized ones. These ones are for your grip. And then you have an extra M4. Yeah, so we got this for the stock. Put that in there. I do believe it's going to be a 4mm hex drive. So that just slides onto the end like that, and then you can tighten that down. Of course, you can use any other kind of buffer style stock, given you have the right adapter for the stock. And then you can use 2 more M4 little short screws, short set screws, with a 2mm drive for additional mounting. Extra mounting points there for you. Optional. So we have extra screws, and then the rest of these set screws can be used to install the barrel onto the barrel quick swap adapter. So the adapter goes into the front here. This is how I like to do it, because then you can kind of choose your barrel length better. So with that adapter screwed all the way in, you could also use blue thread lock on this if you're worried about it. But then I'm going to seat the barrel. There is a normal end and then a chamfered end on the wider end. So I'm going to put the wider end in first, into that barrel adapter, and then I'm going to have the barrel go all the way so it's flush against the gold piece. And then I'm going to secure that with these. Well, first I'm going to rotate it so the words are straight, a little aesthetic there. And then with these set screws, I'm going to start by putting 1 small set screw in to wherever I can reach it to hold the barrel in place. And then I will take the barrel out and then install the rest of the set screws if you want. It's a little redundant. I believe there are 8 set screws for the barrel. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, thread lock wouldn't be a bad idea. These ones actually do come out. I think you put in all 8 and then you end up with like 3 or 4 left at the end of the day, depending on how long the day is. So a little thread lock in each of these helps keep your barrel from falling out. But again, optional, because maybe you want to swap out your barrel more quickly, then that's fine too. And that's how the barrel works. Little scratches on it from the assembly process. So with all of our extra screws here, plenty of extra small screws, and then our grip and top rails. So real quick, we do our top rails. They recommend doing the top rails with the angled slope side in the middle. So something like that. And I don't know why they sent 3 hex keys with the blaster, but you need a whole bunch of other sizes too. Like these are all the, I think, yeah, one of these is mine, but they sent all these hex keys, but these are all the same size. So hopefully you've got some on hand, and then you have just enough screws for the top rail. If you do two screws per rail, then of course you have the extra 2 for the grip. And I did that wrong. I'm gonna rotate that around, get rid of that gap in the middle. Of course, it might have been better to have the angled sides be the front and back of the rail and not the middle, but whatever, not that big of a deal, it's functional. You do lose, maybe possibly you lose 1 slot in the middle. Not a big deal though. And then for our grip, it then uses these big screws, I believe they're M6, and then there's a washer as well that you can put to make that screw hold in stronger and make your grip wear out slower. So the M6 screws are going to be a 5mm drive, which is another reason why I have this extension. So screw, washer. What I like to do is I like to set it on the grip, just in the middle of the grip, like that, and then install that to where it fits. And you can see that this type, this beaver tail grip, does not work, so you'd have to cut that or trim that. Some grips you can get without the beaver tail by default. Here's one that I've cut the beaver tail off already. just whatever personal preference you might have on your grip shape. And there you go. And then a foregrip, whatever foregrip you have. This one is, not sure where this came from, but I found it in. And if you want, you can of course lubricate those linear rails. Occasionally, it helps definitely keep them clean, maintenance, keep the dirt out, lubricate. As you get sand or dirt stuck in there, that might build up over time and cause scratching on the metal parts, making it stiffer. But there's the air seal. Pretty smooth. 14 kg, it's hitting about 300 FPS. If you do want to do side prime, again, it's super easy. That's just bolt, grip, and then either side. And of course, I would recommend a lot of thread lock. Side prime works pretty dang well on this guy on the average. This default springs 14 kg. You could go higher to that. The 16 kg is the preferred, but 18 kg can get you 400 FPS, 350 if you're going super crazy. But there's the Apex build guide. A couple of things, of course, to look out for with the varying screw length and places, thread lock, everything metal on metal. Hopefully that helps. First following their build guide, didn't tell you what lengths to do anything, so hopefully that helps. If not, let us know, but if it does, also let us know. Of course, you have your scar. I'm not going to string it. I find that I don't really like it, but you can look at their guide as well. And then, of course, more of your, so you've got 4 short grub screws left for your 4 screws on this scar. Of course, extra O-rings, and then lots of extra screws. I mean, these are all 6s, though. M4x6, M3x3, maybe. Then we have these M3x6s. And then we have these M4x8s. Then we have our extra M4 long socket heads, M6 with an M6 washer. And then I think this is like an M5. This is all these different sizes of screws. And then our extra 3mm pins and other pins just in case they fall out during your assembly process, and extra O-rings, which seem to work really well. Not sure the exact size, but they get a perfect air seal out of the box. So we'll get some extra spares of those for you as well. And then of course you've got your bolt handle if you so choose to use side prime. And then these are just spacers for the lower rail in case you need to offset it. Depending on what size of Picatinny your foregrip has, you might need to offset the rail to get enough room or height on the rail to install a grip depending on what size your foregrip is. But there you go, there's the Apex Prime assembly video. Not too bad. For an all metal 300 to 400 FPS blaster.